I didn't say good morning. Hope everybody's doing well. Staying out of the wind. We have a lot of wind where we live. And it's not just me talking. That would be more of a hot air thing, I guess. Anyway, we are in the book of 2 Kings, and we're going to be in chapter 13 today. Chapter 13, and it's kind of a pivotal point in chapter 13. Chapter 13 covers the death of Elisha, and we haven't seen a lot of Elisha lately in the last few chapters, but he's there, he's still alive, and it kind of after this, boy, the readings go fast and furious. The kings come and go. There's all kinds of intrigue, and if you can remember who everybody is and how everything happens, I'm really happy for you. But history is, I love history, but I'm not really good at remembering everybody's whoever, whatever. So it's important as we go along to at least see be reminded of which nation we're talking about and what happens with them and why, what is God indicating to us? What should we learn from that? That's the most I think I can get out of it. In other words, I'm not going to remember everything. And that's just the way it is. And that's why God asks us to continually seek Him and read His Word and be in it as much as we can. Okay, are there any comments or concerns about anything that we've looked at so far? There are some things coming up that I looked at that I thought were one thing, and I just write those things down and I put them on my blog and say, this is what it looks like to me. And then as I look at things deeper, I start reconsidering them, and that's just what study is. Okay, so there's nothing. Okay, so just as a way of where we are, this is where we were from last week, and we're still here. On the timeline, that black line kind of in the middle is where Israel gets taken away by Assyria. We haven't seen much from Assyria yet, but we'll be talking about them shortly. Syria is their main enemy at this point up in Israel. So we talked about Joash. He was a good king. He was the king who was saved from Athaliah, and Jehoiada was the priest who made him a good king. And we noted last week that when the scriptures say that Joash was a good king while Jehoiada was alive. And then we saw that when Jehoiada died, he was buried with the kings. And then when Joash died, he was not buried with the kings, which tells us some things, because Jehoiada, when he dies, Joash goes to his buddies and decides he wants to pick up idolatry for some reason. I don't know. It's just it's mind-boggling. And so Zechariah, who's the son of the priest, Jehoiada, goes to him and says, what are you doing? Why are you doing this? You can't do these things. And Joash kills him. He murders him right there on the spot. So Joash kind of reveals his heart. And essentially, that's the entirety of the Old Testament, is people revealing their hearts by their actions. They reveal their faith by their actions. And when we get to the New Testament, we'll find out how God helps mankind cure that issue. But for now, this is what we're dealing with. So, 2 Kings chapter 13. 2 Kings chapter 13. So, we're turning our sights from Israel, and we're going to return back to Judah, but eventually in the next chapter. But right now, we are still looking at much of what's going on up in the north. So let's have a word of prayer before we begin. Our gracious Holy Father, we are so thankful, Lord, that you have blessed us with so much. You've given us this beautiful day that we could be together as your church. We hope and pray, Lord, that all things we do would be pleasing to you and that your word would lift us up and that we would always lift you up. In Christ's most holy name, amen. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and read verses 1 through 9 of chapter 13. In the 23rd year of Joash, the son of Ahaziah, king of Judah, Jehoahaz, the son of Jehu, became king over Israel and Samaria, and he reigned 17 years. So we were looking at Judah. Now we're looking at Israel. I need to correct that, sorry. He did evil in the sight of the Lord. They all do, okay, we know that about Israel. And followed the sins of Jeroboam, the son of Nebat, which he made Israel sin, and he did not turn from them. So the anger of the Lord was kindled against Israel. And he gave them continually into the hand of Hazael, king of Aram, and into the hand of Ben-Hadad, son of Hazael. So, just so you know, there's a lot of history that he's covering here. This is kind of a synopsis look at a lot of history. And then in the following chapters, he's going to kind of detail more of that. Then Jehoahaz entreated the favor of the Lord, and the Lord listened to him, for he saw the oppression of Israel, how the king of Aram oppressed them. The Lord gave Israel a deliverer, so they escaped from under the hand of the Arameans, and the sons of Israel lived in their tents as formerly. Okay, what does that even mean? Are they nomads now? Nevertheless, they did not turn away from the sins of the house of Jeroboam, which he had made Israel sin, but walked in them, and the Asherah also remained standing in Samaria. For he left to Jehoahaz of the army not more than 50 horsemen. That's not very many. And 10 chariots. That's not very many. And 10,000 footmen. For the king of Aram had destroyed them and made them like the dust of threshing. So this is later. This is all, this is like the result. It is, when we get into other parts of these stories later, we're going to see that it wasn't always this way. Now the rest of the acts of Jehoahaz and all that he did and his might, are they not written in the book of the Chronicles of the kings of Israel? And Jehoahaz slept with his fathers, and they buried him in Samaria. And Joash, so here's another Joash, except it's the north, and his son became king in his place. So I have a note down there that says, Israel became nomadic. Because I read that part where it says they all lived in their tents as before, which makes you think, whoa, the only time I can think of when they were living in tents is when they were wandering in the wilderness. So I came to that conclusion. And the more I studied it, the more I realized that it's just a saying that means everyone was living in their homes again. And they were living in peace. That's what that statement really means. And when you think about it, there were nomads that lived during that time. Elijah himself was part of that clan. And if you are living as a nomad and you're not running to the city for shelter, it just means it was a peaceful time. Okay, so here's a king. He's not a good king at all, really. He's continuing to practice idolatry. He's promoting idolatry among the people. So the question in the book is, why would God answer Jehoahaz when he pleaded for deliverance, seeing that he had not departed from the calf worship begun by Jeroboam, and the Asherah was still there in Samaria as well? So why would God go ahead and send a deliverer and help them? Anybody? Gary, and then Steve.
Yeah, he is a God of compassion.
Yes, absolutely. So God is a God of compassion. Steve?
back into Judges, which is, I think, part of the material of the chronicler is revealing, is again tying them to something that cause and effect from when the judges were what they had. And they wanted kings, they got kings, and what's it done for them? Because there's I even hear when David's son, who ran David out of town?
Absalom.
There's this, everyone to your tents, we disagree. The unnamed prophet who was given instructions to not follow anybody on the way back, or just, he messed up and they haven't undone that. They've I think God's shown them that they have, he doesn't, okay, you did this extra, you added to this sin you've been doing. God doesn't take that. I still want, this is what I need. This is what's important. And he's telling Solomon the same thing, high places, and
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay, yeah, God has priorities, and identifying those is kind of what we see going on here. Yeah, I want to call you David.
That's fine. In
his name.
verse 3, we see that the anger of the Lord was kindled against Israel because of their sin.
Yes.
So he sends Syria. What is the reason for sending Syria? It's because he loves them, and he wants a change
Yes.
out of them. It's a correction from a father. And he gets that correction from the king, even if it's temporary.
Yes.
The king is truly like sorrowful and turns to God. He turns to God, and God answers him.
Okay. That's an excellent point. Go ahead, Jeff.
Yeah, and we know that the king probably knows that God is the deliverer because, like you said, his army's been whittled down to nothing hardly. So if he's, defeating, the Syrian army that's been persecuting them there, it has to come from God. You can't say, well, hey, my 10,000 soldiers, beat your army, and stuff. It's like, no, God beat the other army, delivered them. So.
Okay, I think all of those things are in play. God has priorities. His priority is Israel. Dave, did you have something?
Yeah, I looked up the pleading to God from him, and it implied a sickness, like he was so
Right.
sick and dependent. And he meant it. So that's the thing. What it does, I kind of walked away with it, that at the time he meant what he was doing. He meant it, but he didn't stick to it. Which the moral of the story is, we need to be like that, but not discontinue. I don't know if that's the right answer, but I noticed that he was so sickened by his actions and stuff at the time,
Yeah.
and as we are, we should be. But I'm thinking that he eventually, well, I know eventually he went away from that. He didn't stick to it, but God listens to us, and he can sense if we're telling the truth or not. So, I don't know what your thoughts on it are.
Well, we're going to get into that in this next chapter especially. There's some things we're going to ask and talk about that are really relevant to our Christian walk, but also to understanding who God is and what he's doing here, and this overall bubble of what's happening to his people right now. Steve?
Okay, just to, Syria is in play too. They're adjacent to Israel. And, they, they regress too. They, instead of, they're honorable, quote unquote, sort of honorable, they're successful in pushing this boundary with Israel. And then they get to, like, what was it, Haziel killed his father by stuffing his face with a wet blanket or something, kind of like they did in Alabama, I guess. And this thing where I think some of these collateral stories, like about Gehazi and the fellow who was baptized or was taken to the Jordan River to be cleaned of his leprosy, and anyway, there's ties to all this stuff. There's no like dangling things out there. They all mean something.
Well, these are all tied together because God's trying to tell us something, I think. I think everything everybody said is spot on. And we take this, again, we take this big view of things. We're so blessed to have this, that we can look at it from a perspective of being able to look down on the whole story. God is trying to, you talked about Naaman. Naaman was cured so that the Syrian king would be influenced by Jehovah God. And then he goes looking after him. He goes seeking after God. God is he tells the Syrian king that he's going to have success because God is the one doing it. This is what Aaron was talking about. God is doing all these things to try to help his people, to push them in a direction. And then this is something Dave talks about all the time. Yet, even though he does this for them, he's so compassionate, he loves them so much, and we'll get into the why of some of this. He loves them so much, but he's not going to just go in and wipe everybody out all of a sudden. And he's just trying to, there's reasons why all of these things happen. But overall, I just see it as man struggling with God, because mankind keeps trying to do things to make God do what they want. That's a repetitive story over and over throughout the scriptures, especially with the kings, because they're influenced by everybody else who puts their king at the same level as their God. And that is just not the way it works. And Jesus brings that to the fore as well. So all of these things are working together for God's message. And we'll get into a lot of other stuff as well in this next chapter. Mankind is self-centered. He thinks more about himself. He's not thinking about God. He thinks about him enough to beg for some deliverance. And then when it happens, then he goes back to doing whatever he was doing before. And that just reveals the fallacy of man thinking he can do it. I can be justified before God. It takes God to do it, and that's what we find out later. Okay. Anything else? Yes, Kate.
Well, we go back into chapter 8, where Elisha is telling Hazael that he will be king, and Elisha weeps because of the things that Hazael is going to do. Right. So this was not a good time for the Israelites.
It was not a good time, no.
They were really being oppressed. And
some of those atrocities are, they include just murdering of women and children and all kinds of terrible things. And we did talk about that. Hazael, of course, goes, "What? Who am I? I'm just a servant, I'm a nobody." So yeah, this is a horrible time for them. And, if you're the king, and we're going to see later another king, not an Israelite king, but if you're a king and you're suffering great losses, there's a pretty good chance you're not going to be king much longer. So it may have been just for that reason he was asking for deliverance. We don't know. Okay, so verses 10 through 13. In the 37th year of Joash, king of Judah, Jehoash, the son of Jehoahaz, became king over Israel and Samaria and reigned 16 years. He did evil in the sight of the Lord, and he did not turn away from all the sins of Jeroboam, the son of Nebat, which he made Israel sin, but he walked in them. Now the rest of the acts of Joash and all that he did, and his might with which he fought against Amaziah of Judah, king of Judah, are they not written in the book of the Chronicles of the kings of Israel? So Joash slept with his fathers, and Jeroboam sat on his throne, and Joash was buried in Samaria and with the kings of Israel. So here's the end of Jehu's line, is Jeroboam. So here we go. In this first part of chapter 13, we've kind of gone through the entire lineage of Jehu, the promise to Jehu, but we're not done talking about them yet. When I first read it and studied it, I thought, I guess we're done with Jehu, but we're not. Okay, I think the only thing I noted in that is just that we've kind of made it through Jehu, and then there's going to be more details here in a minute. So 14 through 21. Any observations on that last? Yeah, Steve.
When first king was promised. Let's see. The guy hiding behind. The guy who was king before David was
Saul.
Saul. Okay, he's killed on the mountain, and this guy comes up and brags that he killed him, and David took him out because he had killed the Lord's anointed king.
Right.
So we have that happening again here.
Yeah, I would say at this point, the regard for the anointed one in Israel is kind of they don't care.
What? Okay,
They're so full of intrigue, and they just murder. We saw that from the very beginning.
I think you should. My guess is he should not have shot the king of Judah, and he killed. I think Dave said it for weeks. Get all of Ahab's people. They're okay. Get rid of them. But he went beyond that, and I think that this may be my opinion, but I think that when the first letter to Hazael after Hosea, the prophet, after the beginning of the book, Hosea, after he tells him take a wife from the harlot and build your family, he says that God says the massacre that Jehu was kind of a crazy guy. And he was commissioned by Elisha. So send a guy over there, anoint him king, and run, because he's a man. Jezebel calls him a madman. So, that's my contact there. It was like he killed the king of.
There's a lot about the story of Jehu that you look at it and you say he was bloodthirsty, and it was obvious. He really was. He was killing everybody. He was killing everybody. And whether God was angry for him to the extent of what he did is on him. But he was promised 4 generations. There's going to be 3 sons after you, because it says that God was pleased with what he did, which was just execute his judgment on another king. But at the same time, did he go too far? That was a big question back then, and I think I think we see some of that he was going after power, going after he was just going after power. Okay, verses 14 through 21. This is the story of Elisha's death. And it will reflect what's going to happen in the future for Israel, the immediate future anyway. And even in his death, we see, this miracle thing happening, and I just can't. You read it, it's. I wouldn't say it's funny, but it's humorous in a way to think, wow, that this thing happened. And then, let's just go and read that. When Elisha became sick with the illness of which he was to die, Joash, so now we're going back to Joash, the king of Israel, came down to him and wept over him and said, my father, the chariots of Israel and its horsemen. So there's this sort of a good relationship. At least this king respects who Elisha is. Elisha said to him, take a bow and arrows. So he took a bow and arrows. Then he said to the king of Israel, put your hand on the bow. And he put his hand on it. Then Elisha laid his hands on the king's hands. He said, open the window toward the east. And he opened it. Then Elisha said, shoot. And he shot. And he said, the Lord's arrow of victory, even the arrow of victory over Aram. For you will defeat the Arameans at Aphek until you have destroyed them. Then he said, take the arrows, and he took them. And he said to the king of Israel, strike the ground. And he struck it 3 times and stopped. So the man of God was angry with him and said, you should have struck it 5 or 6 times. Then you would have struck Aram until you have destroyed it. But now you shall strike Aram only 3 times. Elisha died, and they buried him now with the bands of the Moabites. And they buried him. Now the bands of the Moabites would invade the land in the spring of the year. And as they were burying a man, behold, they saw a marauding band, and they cast the man into the grave of Elisha. And when the man touched the bones of Elisha, he revived and stood up on his feet. Now Hazael, king of Aram, had oppressed Israel all the days of Jehoahaz. Okay, so here's the death of Elisha, and he's Joash is the king, and he goes and he's weeping over him. And he tells him, he basically tells him, God's going to take care of you when it comes to Syria. And he has him perform this thing where he shoots these arrows, and then he has them strike these arrows on the ground, and he gets upset with it because, and I read that and I thought, why did you tell him to strike it 6 times? And so I don't know if it was a test of will or what, but Elisha's upset. And then there's this thing where they're burying these people, and there must have been, this open grave where Elisha is, and they see this marauding band of Moabites coming, so they go, just get rid of this guy. So they just throw him in this grave, and he becomes alive. I'm sorry, but I'm trying to imagine being that guy. You're dead, and then all of a sudden you wake up, whoa, and you're in this grave with Elisha, and it just had to be so strange. Why would that even happen? I guess that's my question, is why would that happen? What's that?
Is that the only time something like that happened?
That's the only time I can think of anything like that happening. Other than when the power leaves Jesus, when the woman, touches his hem of his garment, and the power goes out of him, and he's like, oh, who touched me? That was weird. And this is something almost like that, but this is just...
Jesus wasn't dead, though.
Yeah. No, exactly. Jesus didn't die on top of that. He never died. So, that, in that sense, you just see, in my thinking, I'm just looking at it going, this is just that revelation of Elijah's mantle being passed on to Elisha. And Elisha says, well, I want double that spirit that you have. And, oh, yeah, it's manifested through this that even though he's gone, God, is still performing a miracle. Dave, did you have something?
Yeah, I too was confused about the striking only 3 times.
Yeah.
Opposed to, the thing I noticed, a couple things, but one of them was he didn't ask Elisha how many times. He didn't ask. And the purpose for that, shooting through the window, was a pretty ancient custom they did towards their enemy to show defiance and that they were going to attack them and whatever and overcome them. And so he should have asked, I think, how many times should I strike them? Okay, putting that aside, it looked like to me that after thinking about it, that he just, and Joash knew this about the arrows being shot towards their enemy, so he limited himself about his attack on them. Which, okay, now I got a reason for saying this. We as Christians, this is a great illustration. Should we shoot 3 arrows towards sin?
Or empty the quiver.
Unlimited arrows towards sin.
Yeah.
The destruction of sin is what Elijah was talking about,
A good point.
right?
Yeah.
So it's something to walk away with,
Yeah.
that we don't stop shooting our arrows.
Yeah, and going back to what Aaron was saying earlier, this is God working. And these men, not Elisha, but these kings, and this is everything, this is the whole of the Old Testament is revealing the hearts of men. Their hearts were not fully with God. And so is it justified to go ahead and let him, he thinks he's going to do what he wants anyway. Let him do what he thinks he wants to do. And he only strikes 3 times. You're only going to get partial victory. You're not going to get full victory. And it wasn't just because he didn't strike it enough. It's because of his heart. It all gets down to the heart. Everybody in the scriptures, that's what God is dealing with. Steve.
Arrows shooting. Can you think of some? I think of like Ahab in that battle he took on with them, and he got hit with a rogue arrow, and he was trying to predict someone else. There's others. Jonathan shot an arrow. David had some codicil on what that meant.
That's interesting. That was actually part of a covenant, wasn't it?
Yeah, and there was at least another one I can think of. I just draw a circle and arrows and look at and throw them all on the paper, and there's probably, I'll bet you there's a reason. I don't think there's any, maybe so, to that.
Yeah, in the case of Ahab, being killed by a rogue arrow is actually not a very, it's not a great way to end up dying. Dying at the hand of a great warrior or something like that, at least you die in some sort of glory. But just an errant arrow that happens to be flying in the air, if that kills you, is not.
Judah fell through the lattice and was shot by Jehu. He was the one who was not supposed to. He was the reigning king in Judah. So that's 3 of them. There's probably.
Yeah, there's a lot of significance in what happens with these weapons. Which, by the way, when we start talking about Assyria, or the time Assyria comes along, we'll talk about it again. The weapons that are happening are the technologies are starting to advance, including the use of iron, because we're kind of in the Bronze Age still. So we'll see things are ramping up, and like it is, like anything, the nation with the best weapons kind of gets the rule, right? Okay, anything else? Yes, Tom.
So going back to the dead man who touches Elisha's body, I think that is, yeah,
Sorry.
I think that's kind of demonstrating that Elisha's power wasn't from himself; it was from God.
Ah, good
So the
point.
idea is that this guy's dead; he has no more agency. So, the fact that a body touching him makes him alive suggests that, yeah, it wasn't Elisha that was doing this, it was God.
Good point. I still think it would have been weird to be the dead guy who fell in there. Good. What happenstance? Okay. Aaron?
Just to kind of piggyback on that comment, we shouldn't go looking for Elisha's tomb. Like there isn't anything really significant with those bones unless God is
Good
deciding to do something.
Good point.
So for whatever reason, God decided to manifest
Yeah.
this power
Yeah.
at this time.
That's, yeah. For whatever reason, God decided to do it, because you're right. It's all right on, spot on. That wasn't Elisha that did that. Elisha didn't do any miracles. It's always God performing these miracles. And maybe the man was maybe he had a good heart toward God. That's why God saved him. We don't know. I'm sorry?
Elisha brought that from the bottom. I don't know exactly how I would tie those all together.
Well, his miracles were, it was not unlike any miracle, really. All it is a confirmation of the presence of God. All of them. That's all of them. That's why Jesus performed miracles, was to confirm that he was from God. Nicodemus says that on the onset. I know you're from God because you're doing all these things. Okay. So here, verses 22 through 25. Hazael, king of Aram, had oppressed Israel all the days of Jehoahaz, but the Lord was gracious to them and had compassion on them and turned to them because of his covenant with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Wow. Oh, we're going back there. Okay. And would not destroy them or cast them from his presence until now. When Hazael, king of Aram, died, Ben-Hadad, his son, became king in his place, and he's not any better. Then Jehoash, the son of Jehoahaz, took again from the hand of Ben-Hadad, son of Hazael, the cities which he had taken in war from the hand of Jehoahaz, his father. 3 times Joash defeated him and recovered the cities of Israel, which reflects that sort of prophecy of winning 3 times in battle. So God delivers as he promised through Elisha. And there are these victories, these small victories against Syria. And it goes, this is exactly what you were saying about God having compassion. And it goes back to the promises that he makes. When he talks, this is going back to Abraham. He doesn't forget these things. It's not like he's like, oh, well, you're not doing the right things. It's like any father toward a child that is rebelling or something. He may be upset with them, but he's trying to push them in the right direction. He still loves them. He still has compassion on them, even though they're just messing up left and right. And I just noted, for the sake of his covenant with Abraham, he's not willing to destroy them. God is very dedicated to his people and to his promises. He will never break a promise. He has extreme patience, love, and mercy. And this is our God. This is the God that we worship. Okay, are there any other points or comments on this? Yeah, Aaron.
Just that the covenant relationship, we don't really fully appreciate
Okay.
this in today's society. The marriage relationship is supposed to be a covenantal relationship.
Right.
You look at God and how serious he is about the covenant that he made, and that he's doing his part, and his people that he made the covenant with continue to fail and stumble and fall short, and he's faithful and just continues to carry them along. And
Good,
we,
yeah.
we need
Carry
to
them.
take our covenants as serious as God takes
Good point.
them.
Good point. And that's kind of, we're leading up to this next part. And we're talking about, this is something that David brought up last week, about the continual rejection of God by his people. You know, there may be a good king, and maybe the people follow God for a time, and then they go and they commit idolatry. And in Israel, they never remove the high places. And so we see even in Judah, they don't remove the high places. Now, eventually they will, but that's only temporary. And so, my question is, we have our own nation that we live in, and we have our own high places where in our own country, in my mind. Now, there might not be an idol there for us to worship or for people to go bow down to, but there are so many things that we know of, I'm sure, if we just were to talk about it, that people put above God. And they don't care whether God thinks it's wrong or not. They just want to do these things. And because they're elevated above God, it's basically an idol. And we've heard that sermon so many times, right? Kay, did you have something?
Well, I was just thinking of us today. There's a football game today, and people are there worshiping football,
Oh, okay.
and they're not worshiping God. So that's kind of what we do today.
Okay, so football can be an idol. Yeah? What else? What else? I mean, if you were to just think of our nation in general, and, our nation has lost its way in a lot of different ways when it comes to Jehovah God. What are some of the things that we see? We don't.
When you talk about God's compassion, as we have read, I think about 1 John, where it says, Jesus, if you sin, there's always there, Jesus Christ is always there, that you have to come back. Just like in the last verse, wherein he recaptures Israel and Syria and given back to Israel. There's always, yes, we have already said that he's always being reminded of the covenant, the agreement that he has made from the long time.
Steve and then Aaron.
First chapter of Gospel of John, Jesus meets a lady from Samaria at a well, and the lady from Samaria knows more about this than people from Judah. She knows that there's a city for them to meet, that's their home, up in, and the people do not know, or it's Jesus. I can't understand that. That's what, I don't know if it makes
Okay. Okay, Aaron?
One of the biggest forms of idol worship going on today is the worship of the planet.
The planet.
Yes.
Okay, I would agree. That is a religion.
Yes.
And it's got a lot of components to it. It's very complex. I agree. And I would agree that most of it's just power grab. And that's usually behind a lot of these things, right? People want power, or they want to feel good about something that they're doing. So they form these groups and things to just do them. And, they don't think about God. They don't, it has nothing to do with God in their mind. Anything else? I mean, come on. There's so many. Yes, Tom.
Perhaps the biggest one I can think of is self-worship.
Self-worship.
We become our own idols.
Yeah. And that becomes true no matter what age, not just here in our country, but that can happen anytime. Of selfishness and the pursuit of just being. I don't mind trying to be the best that you can be, but when everything is about me, there are issues with that, because it's Jesus preaches the exact opposite of that, doesn't he? And we know there's so many other things that are here. You know, there's politics, politicians. We can put, you know, we become so, I'm just speaking personally, you know, we can become so afraid of things and forget our God is God. He is in control. Is he not in control? Well, sometimes we might think it doesn't look like that, but God is in control, and we can't look at any one man and say that guy is our Savior, because there are no politicians that even come close to anything like that. And there's just so many other things. There's a corrupt government, you know, backbiting. There's all these other things we see in these social medias, backbiting and grumbling and complaining. The whole church of victimhood, the whole grumbling and gossip and just all these things that have become the new gods, mostly because it's a god of self now, just as it's been pointed out. And it's not like, you know, where we live, we don't worry about these things. They just come in a different form now. Okay, so we're going to pick up there in chapter 14, and we're going to turn our direction back to Judah. And it's going to kind of tie chapter 13 in there as well. Okay, thank you.